You have probably heard some version of this story. During the Second World War, if a German soldier in a firing squad refused to shoot civilians, he would be shot himself. It sounds absolute and brutal. The officer gives the order. One man steps back and says, "No, I will not do this." A pistol is raised. A second later, he lies dead beside the very people he was trying to spare. Many people believe this today. Many veterans after the war said it. Movies and novels repeat it again and again. But when we go back to the surviving documents, the court records, the post-war investigations, the files in German archives, we find a different and more complicated truth. In dozens of cases that historians have traced in those files, German soldiers, policemen, and even SS officers refused to take part in the killing of civilians or prisoners, and none of these documented men were executed solely for that refusal. That does not make the mass killings any less terrible. It does not excuse the millions of murders carried out by the Nazi regime. It does, however, change one important idea. It shows that at least sometimes, men inside that machine still had a narrow space to say no and live. We will first look at the myth that you could not say no, and why it became so powerful. Then we will follow a historian into the archives, where he finds real cases of refusal buried in paper. After that, we will move into the war itself. We will stand next to a Wehrmacht major on a bridge who blocks the SS. We will sit in a forest with a lawyer officer telling his platoon, "We are soldiers, not butchers." And we will watch a line of policemen being told that they can step out if they cannot bear their task. Along the way, we will keep two things in mind. First, we are not here to sympathize with the Nazi regime, its leaders, or its ideology. The men we will talk about served that regime. Some took part in crimes on other days. Second, we want to be clear and honest. Where the historical record is firm, we will state the facts directly. Where we can only imagine inner thoughts or exact words, we will say might, perhaps, or it seems, so we do not claim more than the sources allow. By the end, we will return to the question that hangs behind the title. Was it truly impossible for a German soldier to refuse to kill civilians and still survive? The archives give us an answer. It is not a comfortable answer, but it is a real one. Let's travel together with Beyond History, where historical stories are told from a different perspective, slower, deeper, to listen to and answer the questions that flow through time. Don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel. Your support is a great source of motivation that helps us create better and better content. After the war, as Germany tried to rebuild and people struggled to explain what they had done, a simple story spread quickly. Soldiers who had served on the Eastern Front, policemen who had guarded ghettos, even some members of the SS, often said something like this when asked why they took part in shootings. "I had to obey orders. If I had refused, I would have been shot myself." Courts heard that sentence. Families heard it at kitchen tables. Filmmakers heard it and built scenes around it. Over time, it became almost automatic. If you told someone about a firing squad in occupied Poland, they would nod and finish the story in their heads. Well, of course they shot, otherwise they would have been killed. This belief grew so strong that it sometimes felt like a law of nature, not a human decision. It was fed by several things. There was real fear. The Nazi state had harsh laws against undermining military morale and cowardice. Special courts could send a man to prison or to a punishment unit. There were rumors about men who had refused special orders and disappeared. There was also self-protection. It is easier years later to say, "I had no choice," than to say, "I had a choice, and I chose the easier, more terrible path." And then there was culture. German military tradition placed a very high value on obedience. Orders were to be followed. Many soldiers had grown up in families and schools where adults said things like, "Do as you are told," and authority must be obeyed. In that environment, the idea that refusal meant instant death fit neatly. It made sense. It felt right. For a long time, even many historians accepted it. It seemed pointless to ask whether a soldier could have refused if everyone agreed that refusal was suicide. But history is not built on what seems right. It is built on evidence. And in the 1980s, one historian decided to look for that evidence in a very specific place: the files of post-war German investigations into Nazi crimes. David H. Kitterman was not trying to write a heroic legend. He was not searching for saints. He was simply a historian with a clear, narrow question. Did any German soldiers or officials refuse orders to kill civilians or prisoners? And if they did, what happened to them? To answer this, he went to German state archives and to the Central Office for the Investigation of National Socialist Crimes. There, on metal shelves in quiet rooms, sat thousands of folders from post-war investigations and trials. These were the files that prosecutors had built when they tried to understand who had done what during the Holocaust and other Nazi crimes. Witnesses had been interviewed. Survivors, former soldiers, and local civilians had described mass shootings, deportations, and executions. Names, dates, and places were written down. Most of these files tell the same kind of story: units arriving in a village, Jews or other civilians being rounded up, orders to shoot being given, shots being fired. But every so often, in the middle of this grim rhythm, there is a different sentence. A witness might say, "One officer protested. A commander refused to give men. He did not shoot. He stepped aside." Kitterman searched for those sentences. Over time, he collected more than 100 such references. From those, he identified at least 85 cases where he could clearly see that a person refused to take part in killing unarmed civilians or prisoners of war. These refusers were not all from one group. They came from the Wehrmacht, the regular army, from the Waffen-SS, the armed SS, from the SD, the security service, from the Einsatzgruppen, the mobile killing units, and from the Ordnungspolizei, the order police. Some were generals or colonels, some were lieutenants, some were enlisted men and policemen. Kitterman did not just ask, did they refuse? He also asked, how did they refuse? Why did they refuse? And what consequences did they face? The answers were often surprising. In these 85 documented cases, not one man was proven to have been executed solely because he refused to kill civilians or prisoners. Some suffered harsh punishment. One spent years in a concentration camp. But the simple picture, say no and die, did not match the evidence. To understand what refusal looked like in real life, we have to leave the archival reading room and step into the places where these men stood. We start on a bridge in occupied Poland. In the summer of 1942, the town of Przemyśl sat on the San River in southeastern Poland. War had already twisted it out of shape. The town was divided. German army officers and barracks on one side, a crowded Jewish ghetto on the other. Between them stood a bridge, a solid military checkpoint where soldiers controlled who and what could cross. Major Albert Battle was part of that checkpoint system. He was not a young officer dreaming of glory. Born in 1891 in Upper Silesia, he was in his early 50s. In civilian life, he had been a lawyer. He was also a Catholic and a member of the Nazi Party. He had joined the party in 1933, like many men who wanted to keep or improve their positions. Yet his record was not one of pure obedience. In 1936 or 1937, he had lent money to a Jewish colleague. Someone had denounced him for this act of kindness. The party reprimanded him and suspended his membership for a year. Even before the war, Battle had shown that he was willing, at least sometimes, to treat Jews as fellow human beings instead of enemies. By July 1942, Przemyśl's ghetto was marked for resettlement. In Nazi language, that meant deportation to extermination sites and mass murder. SS and security police units were preparing to clear the ghetto. Battle knew what resettlement meant in practice. He also knew that many Jews in the ghetto worked for the German army, sweeping yards, repairing equipment, doing heavy labor. On July 24, 1942, he persuaded his superior, Major Max Liedtke, to sign an order placing Jewish workers who served the Wehrmacht under the army's protection. The order said that all Jews employed by the army should be brought into barracks and placed under military guard so that they could continue to work. The language sounded bureaucratic, but the intent was clear: to pull these workers out of the SS's reach, at least for a while. When the SS and security police came to take Jews from the ghetto, they found something unexpected. Battelle had ordered the bridge over the Seine to be blocked. Soldiers under his authority stopped SS vehicles and refused to let them cross with their prisoners. We do not have a word-for-word record of what was said on that bridge, but we can imagine the form of the exchange. These Jews work for the Wehrmacht. The army side might have insisted, they are under our protection by order of the local commander. This is an SS operation. The other side might have replied, you have no right to interfere. The bridge, usually a symbol of connection, became for a few tense hours a wall. Meanwhile, Wehrmacht trucks went into the ghetto and took between 80 and 100 Jewish workers across the river into the army's barracks. For a short time, those people were relatively safe under military guard instead of SS control. One can picture that moment inside the barracks courtyard. Dozens of frightened men and women standing close together, clutching bags, looking at uniformed soldiers who, for once, were not their enemies. A Jewish worker might have whispered to another, maybe the army will protect us, maybe this officer is different. It was a thin hope. Soon, higher authorities in the SS became involved. Complaints reached Heinrich Himmler. He ordered an investigation into Battelle's actions. The Jewish workers who had been sheltered were eventually handed over to SS control and deported. While the brief reprieve could not save most of them from the Holocaust, testimony suggests that some of these workers did survive the war, proof that even temporary protection could make a difference between life and death. For Battelle himself, the consequences were noticeable, but not fatal. He was reprimanded and transferred from Przemyśl to a frontline unit. Himmler reportedly planned to have him expelled from the party and arrested after the war. The war ended first. Battelle survived. In later years, he suffered under denazification rules because of his party membership, and his career did not flourish. Yet in 1981, long after his death, the State of Israel recognized him as righteous among the nations for trying to save Jews in Przemyśl. When we slow the scene down and look closely, what do we see? We see a middle-aged army officer using his legal training and his rank to create a space where SS orders cannot pass. We see him risk his career, and perhaps more, to protect a small group of people for a short time. We also see the limits of his power. The larger killing system keeps moving, and the people he tried to save are likely murdered later. This is not a simple hero story. It is a narrow act of resistance inside a vast crime. But it shows clearly that Battelle could, and did, refuse to cooperate with the SS, and that the price he paid, while real, was not death. Not every act of refusal involved blocking a bridge at gunpoint. Some were carried out with quieter tools, regulations, signatures, and the stubborn insistence that orders must follow proper channels. Bernhard Griese was born in 1887 in the town of Ribnitz. He joined the Schutzpolizei, the order police, and rose through its ranks. By 1936 he had retired as a major. War pulled him back into service. He became acting commander of the Schutzpolizei in Rostock, then was placed in charge of a recruit battalion numbered 323. In early 1941, Police Battalion 323 was training in the East Prussian city of Tilsit. Later, it moved to operations near Georgenburg and in the Białowieża forest, areas where police units were often used to carry out both security missions and mass shootings. At some point during these operations, likely in the late summer or early autumn of 1941, an SD officer came to Greece with a request. He wanted men from the battalion to help carry out an execution of Jewish civilians. In many cases, such requests were accepted without question. Units were told they were needed for special tasks. Men were lined up, driven to a forest or a ravine, and told to fire. Grease chose a different path. He ordered his senior captain to remain at headquarters. He forbade anyone in his battalion to participate in the execution unless he, Greaser, had given direct approval. Then he left. He travelled to Königsberg to see the higher command of the Order Police. There he asked for written confirmation of something that, on paper, should have been normal. That his unit was to receive orders only through official channels, not from passing SD officers. It is not hard to imagine his tone in that office. If my men are to be used, he might have said, then I want the order in writing, coming from you. I will not have them pulled back and forth by anyone who shows up with a request. The higher authority agreed. A document was issued. It stated that Police Battalion 323 was subordinate to the official police commander and was not to take part in actions ordered directly by the SD. The effect was immediate. While Grease was in Königsberg securing his written authorization, the SD went ahead with the planned shooting in the region. Around 365 Jews were executed. The men of Police Battalion 323 did not take part. Again, the massacre still happened. Grease did not stop the killings in that region, but he used the internal rules of the system to keep his men from becoming part of that firing squad on that day. The SS and police opened an investigation into his refusal. He was questioned at the main office of the Order Police in Berlin. For a while, it might have seemed that he was in real danger. Then the investigation was quietly dropped. Soon after, Grease was awarded the Knight's Cross, a high German military decoration. What do we learn from his story? We see that in some cases, a commander who knew the regulations and insisted on them could create a barrier between his men and a killing action. We also see that the price he paid was, in the end, not severe. He was not shot. He was not sent to a camp. In fact, his career continued. This kind of refusal is less dramatic than a man throwing down his rifle at the edge of a pit. It might even feel unsatisfying, but it is precisely the kind of act that gets recorded in files and that shows us how real individuals navigated inside an evil structure. If we move from the regular police to the Waffen-SS, we might expect that all such refusal would vanish. The Waffen-SS was the armed wing of the SS, steeped in Nazi ideology and often used in the harshest operations. Yet even here, Kitterman found a striking case of protest. In May 1941, the Begleit Bataillon Reichsführer SS was formed from Heinrich Himmler's personal escort. It became a field unit and marched into Poland and then into the Soviet Union. Its commander was Friedrich Dörn. In late June or early July 1941, after the invasion of the Soviet Union had begun, Dörn received an order from the higher SS and police leader in the city of Lemberg, Lviv. One of his companies was to go to a meeting point on the Vistula River for further instructions. The company went, led by a junior officer, Untersturmführer Schreiber. When it rejoined the main battalion in the city of Lublin later that day, Schreiber had a disturbing report. Part of his company, he said, had been forced to take part in the execution of Jews and Poles. Men trained as combat soldiers had been used as a firing squad against unarmed civilians. Schreiber told Dörn that he would not carry out such executions again, and that he would not force his soldiers to do so either. The company, he insisted, was meant for combat, not for killing civilians. The files do not preserve every word of that conversation, but the meaning is clear. In more vivid form, we might hear something like this. "My men are soldiers, Herr Sturmbannführer." Schreiber could have said, "They did not sign up to shoot civilians in the back. I will not lead them in another action like this." That same evening, Dern sat down and wrote a formal report to the SS Leadership Office, SS Führungshauptamt, in Berlin. In it, he stated that he would not permit his battalion to be used for executions in the future. He attached Schreiber's written account of what had occurred. This was a serious challenge. It did not question the Nazi regime's policies directly, but it objected to the way his unit was being used. It said, in effect, "We accept combat. We reject the role of the execution squad." Berlin responded quickly and harshly, but not in the way many people might expect. Within days, an order came down dissolving the Begleitbataillon Reichsführer SS as an independent unit. Its companies were scattered among other SS regiments such as Deutschland, Germania, and Leibstandarte Adolf Hitler. The battalion, as such, disappeared. Dern was summoned to Berlin. He met with an SS general, Oswald Pohl, who reprimanded him for disobeying orders. But after this rebuke, Dern was not shot. He was not sent to a camp. Instead, he was reassigned as a major in another SS unit. In December 1941, he became commander of an SS Jäger battalion. Later, he commanded a Galician volunteer regiment. He remained in positions of authority almost until the end of the war. The system removed the troublesome unit, but it kept the officer. The story of Dern and Schreiber reveals another way in which refusal could work. They did not say, "This regime is evil," or "We reject all killings." Instead, they drew a line inside the world they knew. Combat was acceptable, executions of civilians were not. For us today, this line may seem far too narrow, but the key point remains. They said no to a specific use of their unit, and the price they paid, while real, was not immediate death. Some men based their refusal not on procedure or unit identity, but on law and conscience. Nicholas Ernst Franz Hornig was such a man. Before the war, Hornig had worked as both a policeman and a lawyer. He knew the legal codes of Germany and the rules of war. He later joined the army and became a first lieutenant in the Wehrmacht. In October 1941, he was sent to the Eastern Front as a platoon leader. On November 1, 1941, his battalion commander gave him a specific order. He was to lead his platoon in executing 780 Soviet prisoners of war, who had been separated from the main prisoner camp Stalag 325. The method was clear and chilling. A shot to the neck, in a small forest between Lublin and Lviv. We can imagine the situation. A grey autumn day, the ground damp, the trees bare. Trucks full of prisoners arrive at the edge of the woods. Guards herd them out, perhaps in groups, hands raised or tied. A firing squad is supposed to stand ready. When Hornig received the order, he refused. As a lawyer, he believed the order was illegal. As a Catholic, he believed it was a grave sin. As an officer, he felt that shooting defenseless prisoners in the back of the head was not a lawful act of war. He told his commander that he could not carry it out. Then he gathered his men and explained his decision to them. Surviving accounts suggest that he told them that the planned execution was a crime, that it reminded him of the methods of the Soviet secret police, the GPU, and that they would not take part in it. In a more vivid, memoir-like reconstruction, we might hear him say, "Listen to me." He could have told his platoon, his voice firm. "We are soldiers of the German army. We fight other soldiers. Shooting helpless prisoners in the neck is not war. It is murder. It is what the GPU does. We will not do it." The execution itself still went ahead, carried out by other forces. Hornig's men were used only to guard the perimeter of the forest, keeping others away from the site. They heard shots, perhaps saw the bodies later, but they were not the ones who fired. For a while it seemed as if Hornig had gotten away with his refusal. He continued to serve. But the story of his protest reached the SS and police court. In May 1942, he was arrested on the orders of the SS and police court chief, Josias zu Waldeck. The charge was not simply disobedience, it was Wehrkraftzersetzung, undermining military morale. The court accused him of spreading dangerous ideas. By telling his soldiers that they did not have to obey illegal orders, he was, in their view, weakening the will of the army to fight and obey. In November 1942, at his first trial, he was sentenced to several years in prison. His case was reviewed again in March 1945, likely as the SS attempted to tighten discipline during the war's final desperate months, and the sentence was increased. From November 1942 until the end of the war, he was held in Buchenwald concentration camp. Yet even here, his case was unusual. He remained an officer. He continued to receive his pay. Officially, his time in the camp was described as investigative arrest, not a standard criminal punishment. Himmler reportedly thought the sentence too lenient and did not sign it, which left Hornig in a strange legal limbo. He was a prisoner, but not a typical one. Guards and administrators might have treated him differently from other inmates. Hornig's refusal had a heavy price. He lost his freedom for more than 2 years. He lived under the threat of further punishment. But again, he was not shot. His story shows the risk not only of saying no to an order, but of teaching others that they can say no. For a regime built on obedience and terror, that kind of teaching was almost more dangerous than the refusal itself. The next case comes from one of the most discussed units in the history of the Holocaust, Reserve Police Battalion 101. This battalion was made up mostly of older reservists from Hamburg, men in their 30s and 40s, many with families and civilian professions. They were not elite SS troops. They were ordinary policemen in wartime uniforms. On July 13, 1942, they were sent to the Polish village of Józefów. Their orders were as follows: round up the town's Jewish population, about 1,800 people. Select approximately 300 men capable of hard labor and send them to work camps near Lublin. Take the remaining women, children, elderly, and other men, roughly 1,500 people, into the forest and shoot them. Major Wilhelm Trapp, the battalion's commander, was no newcomer. He was a career policeman. When he received these orders, he understood what they meant. In the early morning hours before the operation began, Trapp assembled his men in the village. According to later testimony, he spoke in an emotional tone. Some policemen remembered him saying that he had not asked for this assignment, that he had received the orders from higher up, and that it was a difficult duty. Then he did something unusual. He told his men that any older reservist who did not feel strong enough to take part in the shooting could step out and be assigned to other duties. At that moment, the myth that you cannot say no flickered. Here was a clear invitation to refuse. At first, no one moved. The silence must have been heavy. Then one man stepped forward. Soon a few more joined him. In the end, about a dozen men stepped out of the initial formation. They were not arrested. They were not executed. They were given other tasks, such as guarding the selected laborers or handling other aspects of the operation. Throughout that terrible day, others found quieter ways to avoid direct participation, claiming sudden illness, volunteering for guard duties away from the shooting sites, or simply disappearing when firing squads were being formed. Historians estimate that perhaps 10 to 20% of the battalion managed to avoid killing, though most did so quietly rather than through open refusal in the village square. The rest of the battalion went into the forest and carried out the massacre. They shot women, children, and elderly people at close range, often all day. Many later said that it was the worst experience of their lives. Some drank heavily to dull their feelings. Some tried to shoot quickly and mechanically. Some pretended to miss, but they did it. Among those who refused was Lieutenant Heinz Buchmann. He was a 38-year-old reserve officer and businessman from Hamburg. When he learned that he and his men were expected to shoot defenseless civilians, he went to Major Trapp's adjutant and stated clearly that he did not want to take part in that kind of killing. He requested another duty. We can imagine him speaking quietly, but firmly. "I do not wish to shoot women and children," he might have said. "Please assign me to a different task." his request was granted. Buchmann was assigned to escort the selected male labourers to the train or to guard them, rather than to join the firing squads in the forest. Again, we see the same pattern. Refusal was possible. Refusal was not punished by death. At Józefów, refusal was even openly offered. Yet only a small fraction of men took that step. That fact may be the most disturbing part of the story. The choice existed in that village square. It could be taken without a bullet to the back. But only a few men chose it. The others, for many reasons, loyalty, fear, habit, belief, and the pressure of the group, stayed in line. When we pull back from individual stories and return to Kitterman's 85 cases, patterns begin to appear. The refusers came from across the German war machine: the regular army, Wehrmacht, the Waffen-SS, the security service, SD, the Einsatzgruppen, the order police party officials involved in security operations. They ranged from high-ranking officers to ordinary soldiers. Where the records preserve their explanations, their reasons for refusal can be grouped roughly like this. In almost half the cases, no reason is recorded. The documents simply note that the person declined or resisted participation. In about a quarter of the cases, the men pointed to conscience or religion. They said they could not shoot women, children, or defenseless people. Some mentioned Christian beliefs. In around 15 cases, the men explicitly called the orders illegal. They spoke about military law, the rules of war, or the Geneva Convention. A smaller group stressed emotional limits. They said that they could not sleep, that they felt sick, that continued participation would break them. A few insisted that killing civilians was not the proper role of their unit. They claimed to be combat soldiers, not execution squads. Taken together, their voices might sound like this: "I could not do it." One man told investigators, "This order was against the law." Another explained, "We are combat troops, not a firing squad." A third insisted, "If I kept shooting, I would lose my mind." A fourth said, "Officers appear more often than enlisted men among those who successfully refused." Kitterman estimated that roughly 2/3 of his cases involved officers. That makes sense. Officers usually knew the regulations better, had more direct contact with higher authorities, and could couch their objections in formal language: protests, reports, and requests for clarification, rather than blunt disobedience. Some officers demanded written orders before they would allow their men to take part in executions. Others protested in writing after an action and declared that their units were not to be used for such tasks again. Still others requested transfers to frontline combat units where they would face real danger, but not the task of shooting unarmed civilians. Enlisted men and lower-rank policemen had fewer tools, but some still found ways to avoid direct killing. Kitterman found examples of men who claimed to be ill on the day of a shooting, volunteered for guard duties or transport tasks instead of firing squads, fired above the heads of victims, hoping not to hit anyone. Hid behind trees or other obstacles at the moment of firing, such acts are hard to measure. They can easily stay invisible in official reports. But they show that even within the killing units, individuals sometimes tried to bend their orders or slip around them. We should be careful here. Many of these same men may have taken part in other crimes before or after the refusal we see in the files. A single act of saying no does not wash away a career of service to a murderous regime. Still, the cases show that the command system had cracks. Orders to kill civilians were not always met with silent obedience. Sometimes, somewhere, someone pushed back. The next question is simple and crucial. If refusal did not automatically mean death, what did it actually cost? In Kitterman's 85 cases, the range of consequences looks like this. In more than half of the cases, the refuser suffered no serious negative consequences. There is no record of demotion, imprisonment, or trial. Some may have received a warning or an angry lecture, but the files do not show heavy punishment. In a smaller number of cases, men were reprimanded or threatened. They were told that continued refusal could lead to transfer, court-martial, or harsher measures. Some were transferred, often to frontline combat units. This could be deadly in another way, but it was not a firing squad for their refusal. A few were put under short-term arrest, held in local jails or given house arrest. Some lost positions, were pushed into side jobs, or forced to resign from particular roles, especially within the police. Only one man in the sample, Nicholas Hornig, spent years in a concentration camp, and even in his case, the main legal reason was that he had spread the idea that soldiers could reject illegal orders, not simply that he refused once. In none of the 85 documented cases did Kitterman find a man who was clearly executed only because he refused to kill civilians or prisoners. This does not mean that refusal was safe or easy. A man faced uncertainty when he said no. He could not see his own file in the archive before he made his choice. He could not know whether his superior would shrug and say, "Fine, we will find someone else," or explode in rage and send him to a court. But the hard evidence we have does not support the idea that a bullet always followed the word no. This brings us to the most painful part of the story. If refusal was sometimes possible, and if many refusers survived, then why did so many men obey? The 85 cases that Kitterman found are like small islands in a dark sea. Around them lies the much larger reality of hundreds of thousands of soldiers, policemen, and SS men who did not refuse, who followed orders to shoot and deport and guard. Why? There is no single answer, but several powerful forces come into view when we listen to testimonies and think about human behavior. 1. Group pressure. Many men later admitted that they did not fear being shot by their officers as much as they feared being judged by their comrades. Imagine standing in a row with 10 or 20 men you have lived with for months. You share jokes, food, lice, and cold nights. You rely on each other in raids and patrols. You know their families' names. Now your commander says, "We have been ordered to execute these people. Anyone who feels he cannot do it may step out." If you step out, you are not only refusing an order, you are stepping away from your group. You may be seen as weak, as cowardly, or as someone who thinks he is better than the rest. Even if no one ever says it directly, you sense their judgment. You imagine their whispers. You feel their eyes on you. You become isolated. Some veterans later said things like, "I did not want to be the only one. I was afraid the others would think I was a coward." This kind of social pressure can be stronger than the fear of official punishment. It is familiar in many parts of life, not only in wartime. But in war, when decisions involve life and death, the effects are heavier. 2. Obedience and training. From their first day in uniform, German soldiers were taught that disobedience was one of the worst crimes. Drill instructors shouted. Punishments were severe. Orders were meant to be carried out quickly and without argument. Many had grown up in families where fathers said, "You must obey," and in schools where teachers demanded discipline. When they entered the army, this pattern deepened. When those men were ordered to do something terrible, like shoot civilians, the old habits did not disappear. Instead, those habits made it easier to push aside doubts. The order came from an officer. The officer represented the state. The state was at war. The logical conclusion drilled into them was, "It must be done. I will do it. To question it would be wrong." 3. Belief and propaganda years of Nazi propaganda had painted Jews, Roma, and some Slavic groups as dangerous, subhuman, or enemies of the German people. Posters, newsreels, school lessons, and radio broadcasts repeated the same idea. These people were not like us, and they were a threat. Not every soldier believed this fully, but even half belief can dull the edge of sympathy. A man who has been told over and over that Jewish children will grow up to be enemies of the Reich may find it easier, or at least less impossible, to accept orders to kill them. Some refusers, like Hornig, clearly rejected this worldview. Others, like many members of Reserve Police Battalion 101, lived somewhere in between, uneasy but not resistant enough to refuse. 4. Ambition and career. In many institutions, the people who go along with harsh policies are rewarded. Those who complain or hesitate are seen as troublemakers. In the SS and in the police, officers who showed themselves willing to carry out hard tasks often advanced faster. Those who avoided them risked being seen as unreliable. For some men, the chance of promotion, medals, or the good opinion of superiors was enough to quiet their doubts. 5. Fear of unknown punishment. Even though the files show that refusers were not usually shot, the men on the ground could not see those files. They mostly heard rumors. Someone might say, "I heard about a man who refused and was sent to a punishment battalion. I heard they shot a fellow for refusing to fire." These stories, whether true or not, created a fog of fear. A soldier might think, "Maybe my commander will let me step aside, or maybe he will destroy me. I cannot know. Better not to risk it." When you combine all these forces, group loyalty, obedience, propaganda, ambition, and fear, you get a powerful current. Most men allowed themselves to be carried along by it. A few resisted that current in small ways. A very few, like the men in Kitterman's files, resisted more openly. Their existence does not excuse the many who obeyed. It simply removes the comfort of thinking that no one could have done otherwise. So what do we do with this knowledge? First, we should be clear about what it does not mean. Knowing that some German soldiers and officials refused orders to kill and were not shot does not cleanse the crimes of those who obeyed. It does not make the Holocaust smaller or less horrifying. It does not turn the Nazi regime into something less evil. What it does is change our understanding of responsibility. If we believed that no refusal was possible, that every man in a firing squad had a pistol pressed into his back, then we could say, they were all victims of the system. No one could do anything different. If that were true, guilt would almost disappear into the abstract category of history. But the cases of Bartel, Gries, Dern, Hornig, Buchmann, and dozens of others show that, in many situations, there was a narrow space where a person could choose not to kill unarmed people. The cost of that choice varied, but it was not automatically a bullet to the head. That means that the men who did take part in shootings carried more responsibility than the comforting myth suggests. They may have felt pressure, fear, and confusion. They may have believed propaganda, but there were real alternatives proven by the lives of the refusers. For people today, especially for Americans and others who grew up with stories of the good war, these facts add complexity. They do not weaken the pride many feel in the troops who fought against Nazism in Europe and against militarism in the Pacific. They do not change the basic truth that the Allied victory stopped a monstrous regime. Instead, these stories add another layer. Even inside that monstrous regime, some individuals tried, in limited ways, to push back against its worst demands. When an American grandfather sits on a porch and tells the younger generation about D-Day or the Battle of the Bulge, he may remember brotherhood, fear, bravery, and loss. He might say, "We fought to stop a system that murdered civilians by the thousands." He would be right. The German stories told in this article do not contradict his. They sit beside it. They show that the struggle between obedience and conscience did not only take place between nations, it ran through the heart of individual Germans as well. The men who said no were not enough to stop the killing machine. The trains continued to roll, the pits continued to fill. Their names are small footnotes in a vast tragedy. But they matter, precisely because they show that choice did not vanish completely, even in that dark time. They remind us that we are soldiers, not butchers. I will not shoot women and children. Show me the proper order. Were not only sentences we wish someone had said, but sentences that some men actually did say, in their own words and in their own ways. For us, living long after the guns fell silent, these stories carry both a warning and a hope. The warning is that ordinary people can commit terrible acts when they stop asking questions and surrender completely to orders, groups, and ideologies. The hope is that even under great pressure, some individuals still find ways, however small, to act differently. We began with a question. Was it truly impossible for a German soldier to refuse to kill civilians and still survive? The archival record, as explored by David H. Kitterman and others, gives a clear answer. No, it was not impossible. It was rare. It was risky. It could cost a man his comfort, his career, even his freedom. But in the documented cases we have, refusal did not automatically mean a bullet to the head. Where does that leave us? It leaves us without the comfort of saying, no one could have done anything. It leaves us with a more painful, but more honest truth. Some men did do something, and many others chose not to. If we listen carefully to these stories, they can shape the way we think about our own choices under pressure, in our own time. Most of us will never face an order to shoot civilians, but all of us, at some point, will face smaller moments when obedience and conscience pull in different directions. We may not know in advance what those moments will look like. We may not know what they will cost. But remembering that even inside the Nazi killing system, some people still found ways to say no can help us prepare our own answer when our moment comes. If you want to hear more stories like this, stories that look deeply into the human side of war, respect historical truth, but still tell it in a vivid and profound way, follow and subscribe to our Beyond History channel. Subscribe so you don't miss our next journey into the past. Together, we will continue to listen to the voices that history nearly buried, and we will continue to ask what lessons their choices can teach us today.